Welcome to our series of Healthcare Scene Google Hangouts. I guess we used to be on Google+. I'm so used to saying it. Anyway, our series of Healthcare Scene interviews where we sit down with top leaders in healthcare IT. I'm John Lynn, the founder of HealthcareScene.com, a network of leading healthcare IT resources and blogs. And I'm happy to be host to this amazing group of patient identification experts. Before we begin, I want to remind those watching live that we'll talk for about 30 to 40 minutes, and then we'll open it up for questions from the audience. Also, just a few logistics if you're watching live. If you like what someone's saying, or maybe if you just like the person themselves, you can click on their face and give them props, kind of like I'm doing now for Michael and Beth. You can also click the tweet button on the left side or the post button to share this on your favorite social media site, Twitter or Facebook. You can tweet it out there. So if you do that, we'd much appreciate it. Also, if you have any questions during it or even at the end, you can either join live if you're on live, or you can do /Q in the chat and then a space in your questions, and we'll see those questions queued up. I'll try to incorporate them as best I can during the chat if it fits into the flow of what we're talking about, or if we don't, we'll definitely talk about them after. So please, put /Q and put in your questions. So let's get started with some short intros from our esteemed panelists. Let's start. Beth Justice, CEO and President of Just Associates. Welcome, Beth. Tell us about yourself.
Sure. My name is Beth Just. And yeah.
My bad. Oh, thank you.
People want to make my name more. It's so simple, but they want to make it more complicated. I'm founder and CEO of Just Associates, and we're a consultancy that is focused on data integrity and accurate patient matching. I've been involved in healthcare IT for most of my career, specializing in patient matching for the last 20 years. I speak and write frequently on the topic. I've served on FAHIMA's board of directors and also currently serve on the College of St. Scholastica board of trustees. And I have a lot of articles and speak frequently nationally on this very topic. And last year, in collaboration with the College of St. Scholastica, we finalized a research project on patient matching and why patient matching is such a challenge, and that will be published this spring in the FAHIMA Perspectives research journal.
Nice. I mean, what a background. I'm excited to learn from you. I've known Just Associates for a long time, so I'm excited to share your knowledge with the rest of the world. Thank you, Beth.
Thank you.
All right. And next up, we have Michael Trader. Hopefully I don't screw up your name. Hey, I'm an amateur at this. What can I say? No, Michael Trader.
Yeah, you might want to consider sticking with Beth Justice. It sounds like a superhero. That's a superhero of patient matching.
Sorry, Beth. I revealed your superhero name. My apologies. Sorry. All right. Well, Michael Trader, president of RightPatient. Tell us about yourself.
Sure. Thanks, John. Michael Trader, president and co-founder of RightPatient. And I come from a kind of a different background than Beth. I've got 13 years of experience in biometric technology, system integration, and cloud computing. In 2002, I co-founded a company called M2Sys Technology, which is a pure biometrics technology firm. A lot of customers all over the world. Pretty diverse product portfolio, work in a number of different markets. And the RightPatient solution was actually born under M2Sys. And we officially brought that solution to market back in the 2010, 2011 timeframe. The RightPatient product is a very accurate and very scalable and versatile biometric patient ID platform, supports multiple forms of biometrics, although we recommend photo biometrics based on our experience. And we're really the only vendor in this space that has the deep background and expertise in biometric technology and system integration. The platform itself is delivered via a SaaS model, so it's a hosted backend, but on the customer side, locally, we interface seamlessly with the provider's electronic health record software. We also have a partnership with IBM and interface with their Initiate EMPI solution as well. And so we've got customers now using the product that have over 250 hospitals. They process over 36 million annual patient visits. So the technology is definitely becoming more of a priority that we're seeing in the marketplace.
And I love it. You come from such different angles, which is why I wanted to bring you guys together for this. So, before we kind of start talking about all the solutions out there to solve the patient matching problem, which I almost say tongue-in-cheek, right? Is it even solvable? Might be a question we talk about later. But, let's talk about the problem of it. Like, how big is the problem? Is it every organization? Beth, you want to start and kind of put a framework to the problem of patient matching?
Oh, sure. Thank you. Yeah, it's a pretty systemic problem. I think Michael would agree with me on that. It's a very challenging issue that every healthcare organization suffers from. It finally has a bit more visibility, I think, since the ONC has done its work on it in the last couple of years. But certainly, some organizations do it much better than others. And the ones that seem to be more successful tend to use a variety of different types of solutions, both not only with technology, but in how they deploy the technology, and also they put people and process around it. I firmly believe in the three-legged stool. I think you can throw, no disrespect to technology vendors, and I think the MyTusis RightPatient product is awesome, and Michael knows that. But it is one leg of the stool. It's an important leg, but I think a lot of the organizations are starting to come to the realization that if you still don't train your people well, if you don't train them to use the technology well, if you don't train them about the data capture problems and the data quality issues and the impact of that, you're just never going to be able to get a good solution in place. The ones that some organizations do it really well because they do all the things, and then other organizations don't do anything. And they're the
so what's the percentage breakout between those two? Like, if you're a really good one, what's, just speaking broadly, obviously in generalization, do they have 80% patient matching, 95? Well, what's good and what's bad, do you think?
Yeah, well, you mean as far as how many organizations have a good
No, I would say within the organization, how well are they matching the patient?
Yeah, I think you hear quotes of 90% success rates. I think on average within an organization, 90% probably a fair number. Certainly, what we're seeing more of is that as all these organizations integrate with other technologies, other organizations, and they become bigger and bigger and bigger, more inter-system type of organizations, their rates are way high. I mean,
it just gets worse.
40, 50, 60% success rates. So,
wow.
I think the Sequoia project just talked about that and how how challenging it is when you have a multi-facility, multi-system organization.
Wow, that's a good point. And they're all merging, which almost just exacerbates the problem. Exactly. Michael, anything you want to add to what she said about the problem that you see?
Well, first of all, I completely agree with everything that Beth said. I mean, our technology focuses on the prevention of duplicate and overlay medical records and mitigating fraud on the front end. And obviously there's still a back end, piece to this puzzle, which today is primarily handled by data stewards that are, spending time and money to find and resolve these duplicates. And when you add in interoperability and the push towards interoperability, then the problem potentially just becomes exacerbated as well. Talking about the patient matching rates within an organization, Beth, I'm sure you're aware of the ONC report, patient ID report that came out in 2014, and I think there was something in there where they talked about Kaiser, and if you look, Kaiser has 15 or so different Epic data instances across its entire system. And if you look within a specific instance, their matching rates are pretty high, 90% or above. But if you look across, data instances, when they start sharing information, it's down to like 40 or 50%.
Exactly.
And I think that's probably fairly typical of what we see, by large in the marketplace. And it's for a whole host of reasons. You have, difficulty in standardizing data formats and, obviously problems with properly identifying patients on the front end, et cetera. So what we're seeing, it's great. We've obviously been in this market for some time, and we've been trying to push our technology and really driving a lot of attention to this problem. So it's great to see organizations like CHIME and agencies like the ONC finally coming together and really, putting a lot of emphasis on this issue. And I think a big part of that is because of the push towards interoperability. We've seen three things basically happen over the past, 5 years or so. One is the digitization of electronic health records. Two is increased access with, whatever it is now, 17 million more people through the Affordable Care Act gaining access to healthcare. And now the big, final piece is push towards interoperability, but you can't share dirty data. That's the problem. And patient identification has a direct impact on that. And of course, there's all kinds of, consequences downstream whenever you cannot properly identify the patients.
Interesting. So, excuse me. That's really interesting. It's such a massive problem, but I didn't expect to hear about, how the interoperability exacerbates that problem. So, I guess that's one challenge, right? If you're not good at patient matching, you can't share records. And if you don't know who the patient is, it's really hard to share records. But what are some of the other, I like to put some teeth into it. Like, what are some of the other financial or, health outcome problems? What are the, what are legal liability problems when you don't match? I imagine both of you have understood this well because that's how you sell your solutions, right? But what are some of the financial and, health outcome problems that you've heard and seen about? Michael, you want to start?
Sure. So there was a study by Intermountain Healthcare that was cited in the ONC's 10-year interoperability report last year, which shows that the average cost per duplicate medical record is $60. And there have been other studies that have been done, on this as well. One that we cited previously showed it at about $50. So that's just for duplicates. And then, of course, you have overlay medical records where one patient's information is accidentally overlaid onto the wrong record. And, the cost for overlays, while overlays happen less frequently, the cost can be substantially higher in many cases, and it takes a longer time to resolve those overlay records.
And is that the cost to the healthcare organization, or is that the cost to fix it?
It's kind of the total hidden cost when you factor in everything, HIM, FTEs that are involved in the process of finding these errors and resolving them, the potential impact to things like patient safety and quality outcomes is not even considered in that metric necessarily. But maybe so then you have other situations where, of course, duplicates affect downstream revenue cycle. They cause problems in terms of billing. You may have denied claims. Repeat tests and procedures is a big problem. Those add costs to the greater healthcare system at large as well. And we've seen also some statistics that show, for example, 60% of deaths can actually be attributed to misidentification. So, there are a lot of different variables that are involved with this. Litigation is another big expense, not only in actual settlement costs, but also in putting the provider in a worsened position in order to win these kinds of litigation claims. If you're a patient and you're suing the hospital for something that went wrong, and you go to the HIM department to get access to your medical records, and you find out that there are duplicate records for you, then right during the discovery phase of that litigation process, the provider's in serious trouble. And so, there are all kinds of things to consider with respect to this problem.
Interesting. Beth, he covered a lot of areas. I know when I first met Just Associates at FAHIMA, I don't know, many years ago, They taught me the principle of if you have duplicate records, your denominator in meaningful use is really high, and that means your top point has to be much higher. And any other things? So that was a regulatory one with meaningful use. Everyone will appreciate, right? Any other things you want to add?
Sure. I think, Michael hit on a lot of the, the really important things. Certainly, the patient safety side and just the impact on the quality of care. I think, the other couple of things that we've seen is certainly delays in reimbursement because, the claim is sent out under a different medical record number. And so there's a delay or a denial. And then, they have to go back and reprocess it and resend it in. So there's a straight financial. I think the other big impact, and this kind of goes to what Michael was talking about as far as the cost of a duplicate. We had done a study with Children's Dallas like 12 years ago. And in that study, we showed, again, 12 years ago, it was $100 a duplicate because it wasn't just the cost to correct it. We also looked at repeat tests and delays in the ER. And so their challenge of doing a repeat chest x-ray, while back then they still got paid for it, right? So it really didn't financially cost them, but you're exposing kids to radiation. And the delays in the ER was the other, that was the second most common problem. And that all, even though, yes, again, a very small percentage of the patients, it was only about 4% that had some type of a potential clinical problem, it's still 4%. And that impacted the overall cost of the actual duplicate. And now today in the ACO days, value-based purchasing, it will financially, they will get denied for those repeat tests and delays in the ER and things like that.
Yeah, that's a good point. The ACO applies there. I hadn't ever thought about value-based reimbursement impacting it that way. That's great. So let's move on to the solutions then. Michael, I mean, obviously you provide a solution. So what are the current solutions to the problem of patient identification, patient matching?
Well, our solution at its most kind of basic level essentially links a patient's photograph and their unique biometric data to their medical record at a provider location. So the platform will seamlessly integrate with the provider's EHR system. We've built interfaces already for all of the major ones out there: Epic, Siemens, Cerner, McKesson, Meditech. And so a patient basically just has their photograph taken if you're using the photobiometric solution, and our software will seamlessly pull the information from their medical record, link it to their photograph and biometric data. So during subsequent repeat visits, the patients just have their picture taken. There's nothing more to it really than that. It's just like getting your picture taken with any other digital camera. And we use some unique biometric data, like your iris pattern, for example, in order to identify the patient. And then once we identify them, we're able to seamlessly retrieve their medical record from the provider's EHR. So the great thing about this kind of technology is that once a patient enrolls in the system, it's impossible for a duplicate to be created when that patient returns. It's also impossible for someone else to steal that person's identity. And identity theft is something else that we haven't touched on yet, but is obviously another big problem in the marketplace. It's on the rise. The Ponemon Institute showed a 20+% year-over-year increase since the last study that it did. 2.3 million adult-age Americans or their family members became a victim of identity theft in 2014 or prior. And so it's a big problem. Our medical information also fetches about 10 times more on the black market than credit cards. Mm-hmm. And so it's very valuable information. Of course, it's very sensitive information to us as patients. So, it's one thing to kind of have a system in place that prevents the creation of duplicates at a physical site, like a hospital or a clinic. But what our platform also does is takes that a step beyond and also allows for the securing of remote access to protected health information For example, when a patient is logging into MyChart or another patient portal from their phone or from their tablet or PC, right now it's just protected mostly with just a username and password. And you hear about data breaches all the time. It was some big ones, UCLA, Anthem, et cetera, just in the past couple of years. And, that kind of freaks me out. I mean, it probably freaks out a lot of other patients, because once you get in and can get access to that information, it's very, very difficult to, rid yourself of the problems that can exist when someone steals your identity. In fact, I think the average cost is something like $18,000 to a victim of identity theft. So our system also uses biometrics in order to protect and secure remote access to protected health information. It can also be utilized to verify patient identities prior to telehealth sessions, for example, which is becoming more popular during the pre-registration process. So we have a very comprehensive platform that covers a lot of ground.
Now, I have to play devil's advocate here, because I think most people, when they hear biometric solutions and patient identification in the hospital, they probably say that sounds expensive, right? I mean, and I think some of the solutions are pretty expensive, but maybe that's why you're going towards the photo matching, because I guess the webcams are cheap these days. Is that, is it expensive? And what's your argument, for those people who say biometrics is expensive? I can't do that.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely a common misconception that we hear. The photo biometric solution uses a specialized camera, so it can't work with just a standard off-the-shelf webcam, for example.
Okay.
But it is still a very inexpensive solution. We have a SaaS-based model, software as a service-based model, where providers can pay a very, very small monthly fee to utilize the solution. That fee includes everything. It includes the biometric devices, the software. We integrate with their EHR system. The back end is hosted in our HIPAA-compliant cloud environment. And so for even somebody that just kind of wants to test the waters, start in an oncology department where the protection of patients is critical. If you apply the wrong radiation protocol to a patient, you can literally kill them. And so those kinds of things allow for providers to just sort of test the waters on a very, very small scale. It's about maybe $1,000, $1,500 a month for a few cameras to utilize the system. And then, they can grow the system out from that point if they want to. But when you look at the return on investment and considering, a hospital that sees X number of patient visits on an annualized basis, it costs $60 per duplicate. There's a cost to overlays, there's a cost to repeat tests and procedures. You have the impact on patient safety, et cetera. The ROI for this kind of technology looks very, very attractive.
Yeah, well, Beth put it at $100 a duplicate, right?
Maybe we should start using that. I like that. I might start using that.
Yeah, that was 12 years ago, Michael.
Yeah, so you have to adjust for inflation. It's like 150 now.
Exactly, at least.
Yeah, so we talked biometrics. Beth, what other solutions do you see on the market, and how do you approach it?
Well, sure. I mean, we're a total services provider, and we don't sell technology, which I think puts us in a unique market position where we want to be vendor agnostic, but it doesn't, tells our customers that they can trust us and we're not just trying to sell them a piece of technology. However, we do a lot of consulting on this, and we absolutely do suggest that they look at biometric solutions, EMPI vendor, types of platforms. It depends on the situation. But I do think that I've always been a big fan of biometrics. I think long term, it's going to be again, one of other parts of the solution, but it's an important one. And eventually, as we can get the databases populated with more and more and more patients that have biometrics, that's the challenge initially, is that the biometric stamp is not there in the database. So patient can come in and they already have a record, but that doesn't have the biometric. So there's a cost to get it deployed, but the long-term return on investment, I totally agree, is there. And I always advise clients, start now, because it will take you a while to get enough of your records populated. And the solution that Michael has is a perfect opportunity to be able to do that. I think that certainly record matching algorithms are not where they need to be in most systems, which is why a solution like RightPatient is a good solution for organizations, because the data quality in these databases is really quite poor. I mean, we find that now, 10 years ago when we first studied it, there were 17% of the duplicate records were exact matches. So the demographic data matched exactly. Now it's only 5%. So people are doing a better job of probably correcting records so that they catch it and fix it right away, because it's obvious. Last name, first name, date of birth, gender, social, all match exactly. Well, that's pretty easy. Doesn't take a very sophisticated algorithm to do that, but most duplicates have data discrepancies in those data fields. That's why the duplicate exists. The last name of the patient changed. The database had the date of birth in error from a prior visit, and now they come in and they got the right date of birth and they can't find it. That's where the underlying data quality is really poor in most of these provider organizations, MPI systems and registration, and then ultimately, obviously, their EHR system.
And it seems like that's really part of the solution. I mean, before you implement Michael's, RightPatient or some other biometric solution or, like that, you really have to clean up first, right? I mean, it's almost like if you haven't cleaned it up and you already have a ton of duplicates, then, the other isn't as effective, right? So don't you have to do the cleanup first?
Well, they should do a cleanup, yes. And whether or not it's first or in conjunction, I don't worry too much about that. I think it's important that they just get their historical data cleaned up. They put in a good front end solution that's going to prevent the duplicates, and they constantly train their staff on the impact of not doing their job right. Most of the registrars that we've gone out and trained, as far as, we have a very short PowerPoint that just explains, do you realize that when you create a new medical record number, that is the patient's medical record? Most of them don't realize that. It's just a number to them.
They're just doing a job.
Right.
John, and just to add one thing to that. So, as Beth said, I mean, it's absolutely critical to clean up your existing data. And that's why I said previously that there's really two pieces to this puzzle. There's a front end piece, which is something like what our technology focuses on. And then there's a back end piece, which is always going to be there because you've got mergers and acquisitions. You have data that's constantly being fed into the system. I mean, the data needs to be, there need to be data stewards. There need to be consultants in the market like Beth that help providers to, handle that kind of information. But we actually recommend that for any provider who's looking at this, while it's important to clean up your existing data, it's critically important to implement the biometric solution if you think that's part of the equation as soon as possible, for exactly the reason that Beth mentioned. It takes time to get your patients enrolled into the system. We see our customers spending the first 12 to 16, 18 months enrolling their patients into the system, and you're really not extracting value from the technology until a patient who has previously been enrolled returns for subsequent visit and is identified.
That is a challenge for sure. I think a lot of people, when they think about the patient matching problem, they love to say, oh, well, we just need a national patient identifier. That would solve all our problems. I mean, they almost treat it like this amazing solution that will solve all our ills. But, hearing you talk about, the different challenges you have acquiring new systems, the human issue, right? What if they key it in wrong? I mean, all of these things, would a national patient identifier help, or, or would the existing challenges still essentially be the same?
Well, I think it could help. But you still have the problem of identifying the patient correctly. Yeah. We have a national patient identifier right now if we want to, which is our social security number. Yeah. The problem is that a lot of providers, they either don't have as part of their standard process, putting that information, putting the social security number into the patient record, or, obviously in some cases, patients don't feel comfortable sharing that kind of information. So would something like a national patient ID help to resolve that problem? Possibly, but you still have the same issue of, what prevents me from walking into a hospital and using John's national patient identifier number in order to fraudulently identify myself. So there has to be some other way in order to ensure the accuracy part, the identification accuracy part to the problem. And obviously, in our view, we think that biometrics is the best way to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Anything to add, Beth?
Yeah, I would agree. I think, I do fundamentally think that you're going to have some kind of a national ID. I'm not necessarily a proponent that it be a government issued national patient ID.
Since that won't happen.
Yeah. Well, number one, there's
good luck with that.
resistance, but I think there are other ways to get at it. And I think what John or Michael was saying about the biometrics attached to it is probably the key. Certainly if you have a database that has some type of a regional identifier, for instance, and it's connected to your biometrics, and now you go from Colorado to Florida and you go in the hospital in Florida, well, that regional ID or that local unique ID is not going to help when you're down in Florida, right? So, but I do think that there's other more voluntary ways to approach a unique ID assignment for a patient, but it's got to be connected to the patient, like Michael said.
Sure. Well, John raised an interesting question from RightPatient. He said, can Mike or Beth comment on the increasing importance of achieving accurate patient ID at each point of care along the care continuum, i.e. patient portals, mHealth app? I think a lot of people think, a national patient ID would essentially solve that across the care continuum, but we don't have that yet. So is there other solutions? What were you going to add, Michael?
Well, I was just going to follow up to Beth's comment. She's absolutely right. Unless you have some sort of, global or federated system, then you could potentially run into some challenges as patients move around, between different locations. So you can put a cloud-based solution like RightPatient in place, but one of the other things to keep in mind here is that providers are very sensitive about their data. And so, just giving the ability for patients or having providers just share their information, their patient demographic information with a vendor who's then saying, okay, well, we're going to make this information potentially available in some way, right, to other providers in the marketplace. We have found that providers are very concerned, or they're at least, it's something that they take very seriously. So I think it's also important to kind of make sure that you have the right balance, that you have a mechanism in place where providers still have ownership of their data, they retain ownership of their data, but you have the right technical solution in place to be able to solve this problem. And so regarding the question from John, I touched on this a little bit previously, but absolutely. As I mentioned, more and more people are, wanting to access their health information via a smartphone app or a web portal, whatever the case may be. We know that patient engagement is a huge buzzword in the healthcare industry. Everybody is focused on it and talking about it with, maybe mixed results, but I think it's here to stay without a doubt. So it's critical that when providers look at this kind of technology, that they make sure the platform that they have in place does allow patients to be able to authenticate themselves from any of these different encounter touch points along the healthcare continuum. And so, again, if you look at the RightPatient solution, it allows you to do that because we support multiple forms of biometrics like facial recognition, for example, so that patients, when logging into an app or a portal from their phone, can utilize facial recognition in order to, secure that access. So you need something, that's ubiquitous in nature. It can't be fingerprint necessarily, because you're never going to be able to scan your fingerprint from your phone and to log into a healthcare app and access your centralized healthcare information. It just doesn't work that way. And that's where the experience in biometrics plays an important role. So, we think that facial recognition is much more ubiquitous. Every device nowadays has a camera where you can take a picture. Everybody knows what it's like to take a selfie. People do it on a regular basis. So that would be our recommendation, is to use a platform like that where you can kind of have the best of all worlds.
It seems like it's kind of like any sort of interoperability. Even, we talked about EHR to EHR, and, when they start sharing records, it exacerbates the problem. And now we just exacerbated it another degree because we're talking about mobile health apps and personal health apps. It becomes even harder. Interesting. So, we called this the $1 million challenge, this blab, and the reason we did that is a nice play on words for the CHIME, what do they call it? CHIME National Patient ID Challenge, right? Where they have an ambitious $1 million reward for this challenge. I know you guys have both been watching the challenge, and I think one of you was in DC for the announcement and stuff. How does it work? What is CHIME doing? How can people win the $1 million? I guess. What are they doing? Who wants to take it?
Well, I think that the challenge is meant to incentivize innovation, right? And I totally 100% behind that. I think it's they're calling national attention to the issue. They're providing some well-deserved and long overdue recognition for the complexity of patient identification. And so, I applaud their efforts on it. And you never know. They may come up with something that is totally unique that comes out of this that nobody's ever thought of. I also know that how much money has gone into the development of current technologies for patient identification, and $1 million becomes, kind of a drop in the bucket of the big picture. But I think it's great that they're incentivizing them for, incentivizing the entire market for, hey, come up with some good ideas.
And you have to have 100% patient matching. Is that what I understood for the $1 million prize?
Well, they've got different stages of the program. So initially, it's just a concept that you have to demonstrate, and then they move on to the kind of more proof of concept. And so it's I don't think they're looking for 100% right out of the door. I think they're looking for the potential for that.
Interesting. Anything else you could add about details to it, Michael?
No, I mean, Beth really covered it. I think 100% is certainly ambitious. Knowing what we know about all of the challenges that exist and how easy it is for misidentification to occur in the marketplace. But certainly there are, I have no doubt there are going to be a lot of very innovative proposals put forward. We, of course, are participating as well and intend to put forward what we feel is the strongest proposal. And I'm really excited about it. I mean, just to kind of echo what Beth had said, we've been out in the market for a long time, dealing with providers, talking to them about these challenges. And so it's just great to see that this kind of competition is in place, because it really helps to draw a lot of attention to what is really a big problem in the marketplace.
Well, it's nice that they put levels, right? So maybe the innovation will come in one of those earlier levels, because I know there are some prizes even for those that just make it through the concept phase into, the development phase, right?
Exactly.
So, maybe that will just push the agenda forward at a much cheaper expense too, to do that. So Mike said he's going to participate. Beth, are you guys going to put forward something?
We're evaluating. Again, we're not a technology vendor, so we have all the supporting technology for our company, but it's not. We're still looking at it.
Interesting. Well, I think it is awesome that they recognize that it's a problem, and I think they've actually come at it from a CIO perspective, right? Since CHIME is the CIO organization, the hospital CIO organization, and so I think they obviously look at it, certainly from the financial aspect we talked about. But I think that they've really addressed it, from a patient care and the impact that has on patient care when you don't have the right information for the patient. And I think that's a story that all of us can get behind, because none of us wants to be there. My wife has an allergy. If she goes to the hospital, we don't want to be the ones there and she gets administered a drug that she's allergic to, right? I mean, these are simple, fundamental things that are a problem today.
Exactly.
So,
I mean,
definitely.
I was just going to say, the ONC just, published their roadmap, and they've got some very, very tight goals for patient accuracy of patient matching. Of course, my whole thing is how are you measuring that, and what tool are you using to find out? I mean, anybody can self-report that we've got a 2% duplicate rate, and almost any place that I go into that says they have a 2% duplicate rate, I can almost always find more than 2%. So, there's they're going to have to come up with some type of a consistent way of measuring it. But, they're looking by 2024 or something to be down to a 0.01% duplicate rate. So they're looking for 100% accuracy. And, I think the airline industry has, an 100% accuracy goal, right?
Yeah.
Healthcare should too.
Yeah. But it reminds me of, I think it was here in Nevada, they said, how many lives is okay to die on our roads? And they're like, wait, no, we have to be 100%, right? Like any goal less than 100% would be, unfair to the efforts of what we accept, right? Yeah.
Well, and I think Beth hit on something very important, which is that, even the best deduplication algorithms on the market are only as good as the data that they have access to. And so if that data is not clean or, has discrepancies in terms of formatting or whatever the case may be, there will be problems. And, despite, I completely hear what Beth, I can relate to what Beth said. I mean, despite the fact that there are providers out there that might claim to have very low duplicate rates, those are only the duplicates that they know about. And so, it's definitely something else to keep in mind. And that's, I think, why the front end piece is so critical. I mean, you have to have some way to accurately identify the patient that leads to cleaner data so that, those technologies and, consulting firms can do their jobs of going in more easily and analyzing the data and finding out what really is a duplicate and what is not.
Excellent. Well, we're up against the clock, so I want to thank my two guests today. I think we've covered a lot of ground on patient matching and hopefully put some heart into the problem of knowing what's wrong and why we really need to spend some more effort solving it. So I want to thank Beth Justice, and Beth Justice, her superhero name, Beth Justice. I think
I'm going to have to stick with that.
The name has been
I'm going to create an avatar for you called Beth Justice.
Yes.
No, Beth Just, and CEO and president of Just Associates, and Michael Trader, president and co-founder of RightPatient. Thanks so much for participating. And if you're watching on the replay, you can find more of these videos at healthcarescene.com and great information on healthcare IT. So thank you.
Thank you both.